My name is Maya Doran and I'm 34 years old. On Christmas night, my father shoved my 9-year-old daughter off her chair in front of our entire family. That seat, he informed her, belonged to his real granddaughter. Nora hit the floor. Her cider spilled across the tablecloth. 11 adults sat there and not one of them moved. My mother told me to stop making a scene. My sister studied the ceiling like it owed her an explanation. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I helped my daughter up, wiped the sleeve of her sweater, and said 4 quiet words that drained the color from my father's face and froze my mother mid-sentence. Over the next 90 days, those 4 words unraveled into a courtroom, a forensic accounting of missing money, and a truth my parents had buried for over a decade. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, the channel where quiet people finally say the true thing out loud, and the relatives who counted on their silence discover exactly what a patient woman can do with a folder full of paperwork. If stories about dignity, boundaries, and hard-won justice are why you keep coming back, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and make sure you're subscribed, because what my family buried took me 3 months and 1 dented tin of recipe cards to drag back into the light. Let me take you back to that table, because I have replayed it more times than I care to admit. The dining room smelled like roasted chicken and clove. My mother, Marlene, had set out the china with the gold rims, the plates she only brings out for people she's trying to impress. Nora had been counting down to that dinner all week. She wore her plaid dress and had practiced saying "Merry Christmas, Grandpa" in the car. There were 11 of us and only 10 chairs at the main table, with a small card table pushed against the window for overflow. Nora slid into the open seat beside me, the way any child would. Then my father, Walter, crossed the room, gripped the back of her chair, and pulled it out from under her. She went down hard. Her cup tipped, and cider ran off the edge of the table onto her lap. "That seat belongs to my real granddaughter," he said. "Get up." He didn't even sound angry. That's the detail that has stuck with me the longest. He said it the way you'd shoo a dog off a couch. Across the table, my sister Renata found something riveting on the ceiling. Her daughter, Piper, stared hard at her plate. My mother reached for the gravy boat and said, without looking at anyone, "Maya, don't make a scene, it's Christmas." I knelt down and helped Nora up. Her chin trembled, but she didn't cry because she is braver than every grown adult who sat frozen in that room. As my mother lifted the gravy like nothing had happened, she leaned toward me and said, low enough that only I could hear it, "Blood is blood, Maya, and you're not." I stood up. I picked up my purse, and I set a single folded envelope in the center of the tablecloth. "Before we go," I said, "I found Grandma's will." You could have heard a pin drop on carpet. My mother's hand froze above the gravy boat. My father's jaw went slack. For 1 long second, nobody in that room was breathing. I didn't stay to enjoy it. I took Nora's hand, walked her to the coat closet, and got us out the front door before the shaking in my knees reached my voice. We live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Ashford, about 20 minutes from my parents' house, and I have never been so relieved to close a door of my own. In the car, Nora was quiet for a long time. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Mommy, why doesn't Grandpa like me?" I could have lied. I've told small lies before, the kind mothers tell to protect their kids, but she deserved better than a fairy tale. "He doesn't hate you, baby," I said. "I think he's scared of something, and scared people are sometimes mean." She thought about that. What's he scared of? I told her the truth that I didn't fully know yet, but I promised her one thing, and I meant every word of it. Nobody is ever pulling a chair out from under you again, not while I'm breathing. Here's what I didn't tell her that night. The envelope I set on the table wasn't Grandma's will. It was a blurry photocopy of an old bank statement, folded to look official. I bluffed. I wanted to watch their faces, and their faces told me everything I needed to know. I keep the books for a living. That night, for the first time, I decided to open my own families. I should explain what it meant to grow up as the one who didn't quite fit. I was the younger daughter, 4 years behind Renata, and somewhere in my childhood, a story took root that I didn't look like the Dorans, too dark-haired, too quiet. My mother would laugh it off at parties in a way that wasn't really laughing it off. "Oh, Maya came from somewhere else entirely," she'd say, and the room would chuckle, and I would stand there feeling like luggage left at the wrong gate. Renat. I got dance lessons and a new car at 16. I got hand-me-downs and the unspoken understanding that asking for more was rude. I don't share that for sympathy. I share it because it's the soil everything else grew out of. The one person who never made me feel like a guest in my own family was my grandmother, Helen, my father's mother. She taught me to balance a checkbook at 9 and to bake her lemon squares at 11. She'd hold my face in both hands and say, "You've got my mother's eyes, sweet girl. Don't let anyone tell you different." She passed 14 months ago, at 89 in her sleep, in the house on Larkspur Lane she'd lived in for over 50 years. At her funeral, I couldn't stop crying. My mother told me to compose myself. But here's the part I keep circling back to. A few weeks before she died, Grandma Helen gripped my hand from her recliner and said something I filed away as simple comfort. "You and Nora are taken care of, you hear me? It's handled." I thought she meant heaven. I was wrong. Money had been tight that year, and I won't pretend otherwise. My bookkeeping business kept the lights on barely from a desk crammed into the corner of my bedroom. Our rent had just jumped, and Nora needed braces the orthodontist wanted $2,000 for up front. I'd started doing the math you do when there isn't enough, deciding which good thing your child loses first. Her art class was on the chopping block. She loved that class. She'd once drawn Grandma Helen from memory, glasses and apron and all, and it was good enough to make my throat ache. Meanwhile, my parents took a cruise that spring. Renata had her kitchen redone, granite counters, the works, and posted about it like the rest of us needed the update. I remember standing in my own kitchen, the one with the drawer that won't close, thinking about something Grandma Helen used to say, that the house on Larkspur Lane would go to whoever needed a roof the most. I never let myself hope that meant me. Hope, like granite, felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday, a piece of mail arrived that I wasn't supposed to see. Forwarded from Grandma's old address, rerouted twice, it landed in my mailbox by mistake. It was a statement for an account I'd never heard of. My mother's voice echoed in my head. "Your grandmother didn't leave anything, honey." I opened it anyway. I read financial statements for a living, so I know what normal looks like. This wasn't normal. It was a certificate of deposit in Grandma Helen's name, $108,000. That number made me sit down. But what made my hands go cold was that the account had been closed and cashed out 3 months after my grandmother died. Dead people don't close accounts. Someone else does that. The line showing who authorized the withdrawal named Marlene Doran, executor, my mother. I want to be precise about what I felt because it wasn't triumph. It was the floor tilting under me. My mother had told me, at a funeral, that there was nothing. Here was proof there had been a great deal of something. I did what I always do when the numbers don't add up. I got methodical. I photographed every page and made a folder on my laptop named Helen in all capitals because it felt like keeping her close. Numbers don't cry at funerals. Numbers don't lie. My first instinct was to drive to my mother's house and slap the statement down on her table. I'm glad I didn't. I've watched clients blow up their own cases by tipping their hand too early, so I did the harder thing. I went slow and made a list of everything I actually knew versus everything I merely suspected. I called the county probate office on my lunch break, heart pounding. I asked whether a will for Helen Doran had ever been filed. The clerk told me yes, submitted by the executor, Marlene Doran. The estate, she read, was divided between the decedent's 2 children, Walter and Renata Doran. My stomach dropped. Not Walter's descendants. Nothing about the house on Larkspur Lane going to whoever needed a roof. Just Walter and Renata, clean and simple, exactly the version that cut me and my daughter out entirely. But that wasn't the will my grandmother had described to me for years. Somewhere between what Helen wanted and what got filed, a different document had appeared. And if the filed version was the fake, somewhere out there was a real one. I just had to find it before they did. If you've ever been told you're not real family by people who share your last name, stay with me, because what I uncovered over the following weeks changed everything. Comment, Nora, if you're rooting for my girl, and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. I couldn't handle the legal side alone, and for once I let myself admit that. So I found an estate attorney named Elena Vance, whose office sat above a bakery 2 towns over, and spread my folder across her desk. She listened without interrupting, and didn't pro me. "See me the moon." "Here's the honest picture," she said. If the filed will is valid, you're standing to challenge it as weak. Grandchildren typically don't inherit directly while the children are still living. My heart sank. Then she tapped the bank statement. This, though a certificate of deposit closed after the date of death, cashed by the executor, that's not an inheritance question. That's a fiduciary question. That's possible misconduct. She walked me through the tools available: a formal accounting from the executor, subpoenaed bank records, every document the estate had touched. Then she asked a question that changed the direction of everything. Did your grandmother ever mention who drafted her will? I closed my eyes and reached back through years of Sunday dinners. A name surfaced, dusty but there. Whitfield, I said. There was a Mr. Whitfield downtown on Elm Street. Grandma liked him, said he had honest eyes. Elena smiled for the first time. Then let's find out what Mr. Whitfield drafted. I drove home that night lighter than I'd felt in months. But when I tracked him down, I learned that Whitfield had retired years earlier, his small firm had folded, and his old files had been boxed up and shipped into storage. One name, one warehouse, one thin thread. I decided it would have to be enough. My mother must have felt the ground shifting, because she called me 2 days later. I let it ring twice, then answered with my recorder app running, because Alina had told me to document everything. Sweetheart, she opened, sugary as ever. I've been so worried about you. Christmas got out of hand. Your father feels terrible. I doubted every syllable but said nothing. Silence makes manipulators nervous, and hers curdled fast. I heard you've been calling the county, digging around. Do you have any idea how that makes me look? There it was, not worry, reputation. You always have to be the difficult one, she went on. Ever since you were little, just like whoever your father really was. There it was again, the old poison, the thing they'd whispered my whole life and never once said outright. That I wasn't really Walter's. For years it had lived in the space between jokes. Now she'd said it plainly, on a recorded line, with no idea what a gift she'd just handed me. Mom, I said, calm as a Sunday morning, is there something you'd like to tell me about my father? She backpedaled instantly. Don't twist my words. Then the play she always runs. After everything I've done for you, you'd tear this family apart over money. You should be ashamed. I hung up and looked at Nora, sitting at the kitchen table drawing Grandma Helen again, tongue poking out in concentration. My mother had built an entire story about where I came from. It was finally time to test it against the truth. The phone tree lit up after that. My aunt called to say I was breaking my mother's heart in her golden years. A cousin messaged that I was being greedy and ungrateful. It's a particular kind of pressure, the way a family closes ranks around the people with the most to hide. They don't argue the facts. They argue your character. The old me might have folded, but I had a daughter watching how her mother handled being pushed, and I was done teaching her to shrink. I didn't argue. I saved every message, screenshot after screenshot, into the folder marked Helen. Then my sister texted me directly, and Renata has never been as clever as she thinks she is. Just drop it, Maya, she wrote. Nobody believes you anyway. I didn't answer, so she kept digging her own hole. That money was supposed to fix my house. You have no idea the position you're putting Mom in. There it was, in writing, from the woman who supposedly inherited nothing. There was money. Renata knew about it, and it had a destination, her kitchen renovation. I read it twice, then set the phone down and actually laughed, which startled Nora. You okay, Mommy? She asked. I'm better than okay, baby, I said. My sister had just confirmed the money existed. Now I only had to prove whose it really was. The numbers were already talking. My family was just helping me write down their confession. Finding Whitfield's old files became its own small odyssey. His practice had been absorbed by a younger firm, and Alina sent a formal request, along with the authorization paperwork that makes these requests legitimate. It took 10 days. Then I drove 40 minutes to a squat brick building, where a paralegal met me with a banker's box and a clipboard, and left me alone at a folding table under a buzzing fluorescent light. I found the index first, and ran my finger down it until I hit the line that made my breath catch. Helen Doran, Last Will and Testament, executed 2018. My grandmother had made a will 4 years before she died, when she was sharp as ever and beating me at cards. I flipped to the matching folder, pulse loud in my ears. The tab was there, but inside there was nothing. Just an empty sleeve where a document should have been. I asked the paralegal if files ever got separated. She checked her notes and frowned. Sometimes clients take their originals home, says here Mrs. Doran wanted to store it in her own safe place. Her own safe place. Something loosened in my chest, because I knew Grandma Helen. I knew exactly the kind of place she'd call safe, and I knew nobody in my family would ever think to look there. Grandma had given me a key to the Larkspur Lane house years earlier, just in case, and nobody had ever asked for it back. The house sat in legal limbo, empty while the lawyers circled. I let myself in on a gray Saturday afternoon while Nora was at a friend's. The air smelled of dust and old lavender, and grief hit me sideways in the front hall. Everything was exactly where she'd left it. I walked through slowly and ended up where I always ended up as a child, her kitchen. On the shelf above the stove, exactly where it had lived my whole life, sat her old recipe tin, dented and painted with faded cherries. She used to keep her handwritten cards inside it, and every holiday she'd pull one out for whichever grandchild was underfoot. She'd handed one to Nora just the year before, in that same kitchen. I lifted the tin down. It was heavier than a box of recipe cards should be. I pried off the lid, and there were the cards, yellowed and vanilla-stained, decades of her handwriting. But underneath them, wrapped in wax paper the way she wrapped everything precious, was a thick envelope. On the front, in my grandmother's careful cursive, for Maya, when they tell you that you don't belong. I sat down right there on the cold kitchen floor and opened it. Two things were inside. The first was a document with a blue backing and a notary stamp, the original last will and testament of Helen Doran, signed and witnessed in 2018. It was not the version filed with the county. This one had a clause the fake version had erased. Her estate would pass to the lineal descendants of her son, Walter Doran, per stirps, split evenly down each branch of the family tree, meaning my daughter Nora was a named and rightful heir, and no whispered story about where I came from could change what was written in black ink and stamped by a notary. There was more. The house on Larkspur Lane should go to whichever descendant had the greatest need of a home. She'd left me one, in writing, 4 years before she died. The second item was a letter, 4 handwritten pages, and I could hear her voice in every line. She wrote that she'd known Marlene had been telling ugly stories about me for years. She wrote plainly, Maya is Walter's daughter. I held you in that hospital myself the morning you were born, and I counted your fingers. She'd left the original with her recipes because that woman goes through everything, but she has never once cooked a single thing in her life. I laughed and sobbed at the same time, alone on that kitchen floor. I had my grandmother's word, but a dead woman's word against the living needs more than faith. It needs proof. It needs science. I brought everything to Alina the following Monday. She read the will twice and went very quiet. This changes the case entirely, she said. This is the true will and it names Nora. Then the harder part. But your parents built their justification on a claim about your paternity. As long as that story floats out there unchallenged, they'll argue you and Nora don't belong in Walter's line. How do you kill a lie that old? You test it, she said. A DNA test, through an accredited lab with a documented chain of custody, settles it beyond argument. The problem was Walter, but Alina smiled the way lawyers smile when the other side has made a mistake. They put your paternity at issue themselves. Your father called Nora not real family in front of witnesses. When a party raises paternity to strip an heir, the court can order genetic testing to resolve it. My family had spent decades using my supposed blood to push me out. Now that same weapon could be turned around and pointed the other way, entirely in the open. They used blood to erase my daughter, I said. So we'll use blood to put her back, that's the case. I drove home past the orthodontist's office, and for the first time in months, didn't flinch at the sign in the window. While the legal machinery ground forward, I did what I'm actually good at. I built a spreadsheet. Give me enough statements and enough coffee, and I will find every dollar that ever tried to hide. Between the forwarded statement, the probate filings, and public property records, I had enough to map the shape of the theft. The picture that emerged made me sick and steady at once. The CD, $108,000, closed and withdrawn 3 months after Grandma died. Then a second thread. My mother had refinanced the Larkspur Lane house before the estate was settled, pulling $90,000 in equity from a home she didn't yet have clear title to. More than $200,000 had moved out of my grandmother's estate and into my mother's control. From there, the money split. A chunk went to Renata, around the time of her granite kitchen, and one line stopped me cold, $17,000 wired in installments to a casino resort 3 states away. My mother wasn't just stealing to fund cruises. My mother was in debt, gambling debt, the quiet kind that eats a retirement account from the inside out. That was the engine under all of it. Not vanity, desperation and greed wearing a Christmas apron. I labeled every cell, cross-referenced every date, and felt no satisfaction, only a cold clarity. Numbers don't lie, and these ones were confessing on every row. Elena filed everything at once. We challenged the admitted will based on the newly discovered 2018 original, petitioned to compel a full executor's accounting, and filed a motion for genetic testing, quoting my father's own words back to the court. When my mother was served, she called me that evening, the sweetness gone within a minute. How dare you hire a lawyer against your own family? I hired a lawyer against the person who took Grandma's money and lied to a court about it. She started crying, that practiced, weaponized crying that used to make me apologize for existing. It didn't work anymore. You'll regret this, she said, and the tears dried up fast once the threat didn't land either. I told her I had a very precise idea what I was doing, down to the penny, and hung up. People kept telling me to let it go, that family is family. But letting it go would have taught Nora that the loudest person in the room always wins. I wasn't willing to teach her that. If you believe kids learn courage from watching their mothers refuse to back down, hit like and subscribe, because the hearing is where all of it finally came out. A court date was set for spring. The subpoenaed bank records arrived, and I cleared my kitchen table to spread them out. Everything I'd reconstructed from scraps was confirmed in the bank's own cold print. The CD, the refinance, the transfers to Renata, the casino wires, all dated and signed exactly as I'd mapped it. But the records held one thing I hadn't predicted, and it turned a civil dispute into something far worse. Tucked into the estate file was a power of attorney form, supposedly signed by Grandma Helen, authorizing the CD's closure. Except the date on it was after she had died. My mother had signed my grandmother's name to a legal document weeks after we'd buried her. This wasn't just a woman taking more than her share of an estate. This was forgery. I emailed a scan to Elena, who called back within the hour. Maya, this isn't only probate anymore. I sat in my quiet kitchen with the whole ugly map spread out in front of me and thought about my grandmother wrapping a will in wax paper because she knew the woman she'd raised her son to marry would go through everything. She'd been right, and she'd left me the one thing that could make it matter. The court granted the motion for genetic testing, and my father was ordered to provide a sample. There's a particular justice in a man being compelled, by the very system he thought protected him, to prove the thing he'd used as a weapon. I wasn't in the room for the swab, but I was in the courthouse afterward waiting on Elena when my father walked out. We hadn't spoken since Christmas. He looked older than I remembered, smaller, his coat hanging loose on him. For a moment I thought he'd walk right past me. Instead he stopped, and something almost human crossed his face. You don't understand the hole your mother's in, he said quietly. The debt, you have no idea. For one honest second, I saw a tired old man who'd spent 40 years covering for a woman he was afraid of. I felt something dangerously close to pity. Then he ruined it. His jaw set, and the softness slammed shut like a screen door. But you're still tearing this family apart, he said. Over money. Your grandmother would be ashamed of you. I let that sit. I thought about Grandma's letter, folded in my bag, the one that said the exact opposite in her own hand. Grandma left me a letter, Dad, I said. You should read what she'd actually be ashamed of. His face went slack, the same slackness from the Christmas table. This time I understood what it was. It was fear not of me, of the results of a truth he'd helped bury, finally clawing its way up. He turned and walked into the parking lot without another word, and I watched him go and did not call after him. The wait for the DNA results was the longest 2 weeks of my life. The family split down the middle. A few relatives who'd scolded me went quiet, then started asking careful questions, the way people do when they realize they may have bet on the wrong horse. Then Renata reached out, her tone completely changed. "Can we just talk?" she Oat, sister to sister, away from the lawyers. A month earlier, that message might have gotten to me, but I'd learned something about my family. The moment they want to talk privately is the moment they're most afraid of what's about to happen publicly. "Anything you want to say can go through Alina," I replied, and I meant it. I won't pretend I wasn't scared. Late at night, the old fear crept in. What if the story they'd told my whole life turned out to be true, and I'd built all of this on sand? But then I'd think about Grandma Helen's hands on my face. "You've got my mother's eyes, sweet girl." I chose to believe her over them. On a Thursday afternoon, while Nora colored at the table, an email landed in my inbox with a subject line that made everything stop. "Your results are ready." I didn't open it right away. I made Nora a snack first, apple slices and peanut butter, because my hands needed something ordinary to do. Then I took my laptop into the bedroom, closed the door, and clicked. There was a lot of technical language, probability indices, marker comparisons, the kind of thing I usually love. But my eyes went straight to the conclusion, printed in bold near the bottom. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Walter Doran was my father, not probably, not likely, as close to certain as a human being gets. I read it, and I want to tell you I felt vindicated, but it was quieter than that, and it went deeper. Every party where my mother said I'd come from somewhere else. Every whispered joke. Every time I'd stood at the edge of my own family wondering if I was the reason I didn't fit. All of it, a lie, a convenient, cruel, profitable lie, invented to justify writing me and my daughter out of a will, and pocketing what my grandmother had meant for us. I sat on the edge of my bed and let a few tears fall, but they weren't sad tears. They were the tears you cry when a weight you've carried since childhood finally gets set down. I was Walter Doran's daughter. I always had been. Nora was Helen Doran's rightful great-granddaughter, named in a will, backed by science, and no one on earth could pull her chair out from under her again. I dried my face, walked out to the kitchen, and helped my daughter with her homework. Some victories you don't shout, you just breathe them. 2 days later, the settlement offer arrived, and I understood at once that it was a trap wearing a bow. My mother's attorney reached out to Alina with terms. My mother would pay a modest sum, well below what the estate owed, in exchange for dropping the challenge and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Take a little money, and agree to never tell anyone what she'd done. The family closed ranks around the offer immediately. Even I was tempted, and I'll be honest about that, I'm not rich. The number would have covered Nora's braces and a year of rent. For about an hour, I let myself imagine it. Then I imagined explaining it to Nora someday, that the truth had a price, and I'd sold it, and the people who'd pushed her off a chair had bought their way out with pocket change, and a piece of paper that said I'd stay quiet. "No," I told Alina, "we go to the hearing." Alina actually sounded pleased. "I was hoping you'd say that." My mother had put a dollar figure on my silence, but she'd made a fundamental error in her math, the kind I catch in other people's books every day. She'd valued the wrong thing. My silence was never for sale. My daughter's dignity was worth more than the whole estate, and I was about to prove it in a room where nobody could lie their way out. The week before the hearing, Alina and I built our case the way I balance a ledger line by line until everything reconciled. We had the original 2018 will, notarized with the per stirps clause naming Nora's line. We had Grandma Helen's 4-page letter in her own hand describing the lie and swearing to my birth. We had the DNA results, 99.99%. We had the subpoenaed bank records, the closed CD, the refinance, the transfers, the casino wires. And we had the forged power of attorney, my grandmother's signature dated after her own funeral. Alina organized it all into tabbed, numbered exhibits and gave me one piece of advice I took to heart. "Don't perform," she said. "You don't need to, the paper does the shouting. You stay calm and let them be the ones who lose control." I practiced saying less. That's harder than it sounds for a woman who spent her life over-explaining herself to people who had already decided she was wrong. But I understood the power of it now. On Christmas night, I'd set a folded page on the table and said 4 quiet words as a bluff just to watch their faces. I found Grandma's will. Back then, I'd been guessing. Now I had the real thing, notarized and true, sitting in a folder with a DNA report clipped behind it. I decided I would say those same words again, in that courtroom, at the exact right moment. Not as a bluff this time, as a verdict. I laid out my clothes the night before, plain and sensible, the way you dress when you want the room looking at the evidence and not at you. Then I checked on Nora, asleep with a crayon still in her hand, and promised her one more time. This ends now. The probate courtroom was smaller than I expected, all pale wood and quiet. I'd arranged for Nora to stay with my friend Renee that day. Whatever happened, my daughter was not going to sit in a room and hear her family argue over whether she counted. I arrived early and sat beside Alina, my folder squared on the table. My father came in stiff and gray, avoiding my eyes. Renata sat behind them, arms crossed. My mother swept in like the wronged party at her own tribunal, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue clearly prepared in the car. My mother's attorney painted her as a grieving widow's daughter, a devoted executor under attack by an ungrateful child chasing money. I let it wash over me. Every word he said was a wall, and I had the wrecking ball folded neatly in a manila folder. The judge, silver-haired and flat-voiced, called the matter to order. This is a hearing on a contested will and a petition regarding the conduct of the executor. Let's proceed. I put my hand flat on my folder and thought about the sound of a chair scraping across hardwood and my daughter hitting the floor while 11 adults said nothing. I got very, very calm. My mother testified first, and she was good, I'll give her that. Years of playing the victim had made her fluent in it. She told the judge that Grandma Helen had always wanted everything to go to Walter and Renata, that she'd acted only as a faithful executor, that the estate had been modest. She dabbed her eyes at all the right moments. When Alina rose to cross-examine, she did it gently, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. Mrs. Doran, you've testified the estate was modest. Are you familiar with a certificate of deposit in the amount of $108,000? I don't recall the exact accounts. Alina slid the exhibit forward. This one was closed and cashed 3 months after the decedent's death. The authorizing signature is yours, as executor. My mother's composure cracked. That was estate business. It was handled properly. And the $90,000 in equity you pulled from the house before the estate was settled, also estate business. That house was ours, my mother's voice climbed. It was always going to be ours. There it was, the truth leaking through the performance, not Grandma's wishes, ours. And the $17,000 wired to a casino resort in another state, whose business was that? The courtroom went still. I don't have to explain my personal finances, she snapped, forgetting she was the executor of someone else's money. The judge made a small note. I sat perfectly quiet, watching my mother do the one thing I'd never once managed to get her to do at any dinner table in my life. Answer for herself. Then Alina turned to the will itself, the part I'd waited months for. Your Honor, the will admitted to probate was filed by Mrs. Doran as executor. We've submitted a different document, the original, notarized and witnessed in 2018. She handed it up. The silence stretched, and I watched my mother's face drain as she realized which document had surfaced from the dead. This original contains a clause absent from the filed version. It leaves the estate to the lineal descendants of Walter Doran, per stirps, including the decedent's great-granddaughter, Nora Doran. My father shifted in his seat. Alina read a passage from Grandma Helen's letter aloud, and hearing her words in that formal room undid something in my chest. Maya is Walter's daughter. I held you in that hospital myself the morning you were born, and I counted your fingers. My father surged half out of his chair. She didn't know what she was signing, she was an old woman. The judge looked at him over her glasses, unimpressed. Mr. Doran, the document is notarized with 2 witnesses attesting to her competence. Sit down, please. He sat, but the damage was done. He just called his own mother senile in open court to keep her money. His face went the color of ash. My mother grabbed his sleeve, hissing at him to be quiet. 2 thieves finally cornered, turning on each other in a room full of witnesses. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the strange, level calm of a column of numbers that had finally added up. Elena let their outburst hang in the air, then laid the last exhibit before the court. One final matter, Your Honor. The respondents have long maintained that Ms. Doran is not the biological daughter of Walter Doran, and used that claim to exclude her line from the estate. Mr. Doran repeated it publicly this past Christmas. We moved for genetic testing. She handed up the report. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The claim used to disinherit her, and her child is false. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock. The judge set the report down and looked at my parents for a long, cool moment. Then she turned to me. Ms. Doran, is there anything you'd like to add? I stood up. I'd waited my whole life for a room to actually turn and look at me, and now that it had, I didn't need to fill it with noise. I kept my voice as calm as still water, and said the same 4 words I'd said that night, only now they were true, proven, and impossible to take back. I found Grandma's will, then softer, and Grandma found the truth first. My mother broke, not the practiced tears this time, the real ones, ugly and furious. You've destroyed this whole family, you ungrateful girl, after everything I gave you. She was shouting now, the mask gone completely, while I stood there with my hands folded, saying nothing. My father had gone white and couldn't meet my eyes. The judge tapped her gavel once, sharp. That's enough, Mrs. Doran. We'll recess while I review these exhibits. When the judge returned, she didn't waste words. She found the filed will invalid and recognized the 2018 original as my grandmother's true last testament. She removed my mother as executor for breach of fiduciary duty and ordered restitution of the full amount taken from the estate, more than $200,000, plus interest. Then she addressed the forged power of attorney directly. Signing a deceased person's name to a legal instrument was a matter she'd be referring to the district attorney's office. My mother made a small, wounded sound. Renata, who'd already spent the money she was now going to have to return, put her face in her hands. The estate was ordered distributed the way Helen had actually written it, per stirps, my line and Renata's line each taking their share. The house on Larkspur Lane went to the descendant with the greatest need of a home. That was me. That was Nora. Nobody in that courtroom applauded, and I didn't want them to. There's no applause for the moment a lie finally collapses under its own weight. There's just quiet, and the truth standing where the lie used to be. I gathered my folder, squared the edges the way I always do, and thought about my grandmother wrapping a will in wax paper, trusting that someday the right person would come looking in the one place that woman would never think to check. She'd bet on me. She'd been right. The final number had come in, and for the first time in my family's history, it was honest. My mother caught me in the hallway outside because of course she did. The fury was already gone, swapped out for the soft, pleading voice she keeps for when the other tools stop working. Maya, sweetheart, please. She reached for my arm. We're still family. You can't just cut us off. I'm your mother. I stopped and looked at her, and felt no urge to scream, no urge to explain, none of the old churning need for her to finally understand me. That need was gone. It had stayed behind in the courtroom. You told me blood is blood, I said quietly, and that I wasn't. You said it at a Christmas table in front of my daughter. She started to say she hadn't meant it. I didn't let her. Here's what you taught me, Mom. Blood is blood, and it was never enough, not the way you did it. I gently pulled my arm back. You can talk to my lawyer. That's the only number you have now. Then I walked out of that courthouse into a bright, cold afternoon, and I did not look back to see whether she was watching. For the first time in 34 years, I wasn't waiting for a seat at their table. I was going home to build one of my own. By late spring, it was done. The restitution went into a trust with Nora's name on it, safe where no one could ever quietly cash it out again. We moved into the house on Larkspur Lane, and the first thing Nora claimed was the kitchen, standing at the same counter where Helen taught me to make lemon squares. My mother faces review by the district attorney over the forged signature, plus a civil judgment she'll be paying down for years. My father has gone silent, the only apology a man like him knows how to give. Renata had to return the money she'd already spent, and we don't speak, and that's all right. Contact goes through my attorney. There are no shared holidays. It isn't cruelty, it's a fence. And good fences let you finally rest easy in your own yard. Nora is back in art class. Her braces went on in April, and she hasn't once asked me why anyone in our family hated her, because she doesn't feel it anymore. Neither do I. Some nights after Nora falls asleep, I sit in Grandma Helen's kitchen with a cup of tea and listen to how quiet a peaceful house can be. Last week she looked up from her homework and asked, almost shy, "Mommy, do we really get to live here for real?" "Yes," I told her. "For real. Grandma Helen wanted it this way. She left it to us on purpose." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her math, humming, completely at ease in a house where she is wanted. That's the thing my parents never understood, the thing that cost them everything in the end. They thought family was a locked door you could shove people away from. My grandmother knew better. Family is whoever counts your fingers on the morning you're born and tells the truth about it, even from the grave. Blood never gave anyone the right to make my daughter feel small. And the day I stopped begging for a seat at their table was the day I finally built one of our own. That's my story. One shove, 4 quiet words, and a grandmother who told the truth from inside a recipe tin, trusting the right person would eventually come looking. If this reminded you that being calm is not the same as being weak, and that your child's dignity is worth more than any amount of family peace, take that as your sign to hold your ground. If someone you love needs to hear it, share this with them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.